if I want to use BlockKit, but I also want to use Knock, am I sending you API requests that have BlockKit in them? Or am I,
No,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, you are building a template in Knock that is just JSON and represents like the block kit message that you want to generate in Slack.
And then when I send you an API request, I reference the ID of that template that I created in the Knock UI or something. Yeah.
Yeah, you're triggering the workflow. Let's say it's comment created is the workflow.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Highlight Podcast. My name is Jay, and I'm the CEO of Highlight. And today we're talking to Sam, the CEO of Knock, a dev tool startup building an easy, developer-friendly way to build and maintain your notifications infrastructure. This one comes near and dear to me, as our team at Highlight has spent a lot of time thinking about notifications. And I was also talking to Sam a few days back, and he mentioned some features that make Knock now a good choice for even more complex use cases like ours. So excited to go deeper into that. But yeah, before we get into that, Sam, thanks for coming. And if you don't mind, would love for you to just introduce yourself, and then we can get into the story of Knock.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me onto the show. We've known each other for a long time now, I think since you started Highlight and since I started Knock, but it's fun to just come on the show and get to talk about startups. So yeah, I'm Sam. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Knock. Knock is notification infrastructure for powering product messaging, whether that's in-app, over channels like email, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Push, SMS. And we're also a tool for preference management. So today we power the full product notification systems for companies like Vercel, Amplitude, Webflow, and hundreds of others.
Wow, wow, that's very cool. And then, like, where did it start, Sam? So, like, tell me, like, well, even before Knock, the actual idea, were you and your co-founder thinking about other ideas when you, like, quit your job to start working on this? Or was it that, hey, we want to build this, what do we build first?
Yeah, we first started talking about doing a company together in 2020. It was the pandemic. We were both in New York. And at the time, I was on the product team at a company called Frame.io. And Chris, my co-founder, was one of the first engineering managers at the company. So we had worked together for years there. And first just like knew that we really enjoyed working together and knew like if we were going to do the founder journey, we wanted to do it together. And I think that was like a huge unlock for us. It was like, all right, we at least know that we've kind of found our person
Yeah,
for
that's like
this.
the most important part, I feel like. It's like
Totally.
very
Yeah.
underrated for non-startup people, I think. Like when you're looking from the outside, you know?
It is. And like with Chris, I just knew like, okay, whatever we end up doing, like, I've got like the utmost confidence in him and like it's a very strong foundation to just like be in it with a person that you really trust and is a close friend. So
Sure.
was very lucky to meet him at Frame. And, we started digging into a few different ideas kind of late at night and on the weekends while we were, locked in our apartments. COVID was, a lot of things, but if there was one like silver lining, it was that it gave a lot of us time to like think about some of this stuff.
Sure.
And there was one other idea that we had explored a little bit around kind of performance monitoring and single page applications and trying to understand like where you run into like performance issues that take away from like end user experience. But notifications was very quickly like, as we listed out pain points and problems that we had schlepped through with in-house tools at Frame.io, where we said like, okay, this feels like a problem that a lot of people have that has kind of defaulted to an in-house build for a long time. And like if you could turn this into an API first solution that was flexible, that was composable, that was reliable, would people use that and would they do it instead of building it in-house? So that's really pretty quickly we kind of landed on that as the idea that we wanted to pursue. And it didn't immediately go from that into, okay, what do we want to build first? We spent a good probably 3 months, and it was kind of nights and weekends, so it wasn't like full time, but we spent a few months just going through our network, talking to people that would be kind enough to take some time to talk to two founders who were kind of exploring a new space. And we had like the world's ugliest Google slide deck. It was just like so basic. I did the kind of early designs of the product in a wireframing tool called Whimsical. And but it worked as a way to like communicate like, hey, here's this idea we're starting to explore and shape, and the problem, you know, we think we're solving with this, and does that resonate? And we shaped it a lot through those conversations, and that then became like the first earliest version of Knock that, you know, we shipped a quick alpha on and got to some design partners, and we were rolling from there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so then what was the first version of Knock? Like, was it, I know you guys do multi-channel, like every, I forget the term you used just now, but like you'll render your notifications in the app, you'll render it in Slack, you'll render it everywhere, right? But what was the V1 of it? And yeah, maybe we start there.
Yeah, good question, because today Knock is like a full omni-channel messaging platform, right? And any channel where you might want to reach a user is something that you can like very quickly set up with Knock. But it's a good question because we kind of knew, okay, like eventually that's the place that we have to be at, but we can't just spend a year kind of building all these integrations, and like we need to get something into the hands of users and start getting feedback. So
Yep.
The very earliest like alpha version of Knock, even calling it an alpha is probably a little too generous. It was a like real demo, but not something that you could actually use as a customer. But the very first channel we started with was in-app. And the reason for that is like for email and SMS and push, you know, there are platform APIs that you can use to deliver those messages, and that's what our customers bring to Knock anyways today. We don't manage last mile delivery, we manage orchestration across all those APIs. But in-app was the one piece where it felt like, okay, if there's a reason that teams continue to build this in-house, it's because like no kind of customer engagement platforms out there are really handling like stateful, real-time, you know, in-app feeds or in-app inboxes. And
Got it.
at the same time, we were seeing like Algolia had done some really cool stuff with component libraries for kind of composing search experiences and faceted search experiences where, you know, you can get started really quickly through a few components. And companies like Clerk and Stitch and WorkOS were doing similar things in Auth, right? So we saw that and said, okay, now that it feels like the front end has largely kind of aggregated around like the React set, then can we basically introduce our own component as a way to take something that, you know, normally takes months to build and is now just like a component that you can drop into your front end in, you know, a few minutes and you have it working locally.
Understood.
So yeah, so that to us really felt like the fastest thing that we could get to that would be, you know, differentiated and would add a lot of value like very quickly.
Sure.
In a really turnkey way to customers. So
Got it.
we started there. That was the initial demo. And we, at the end of 2020, you know, during the holidays, we basically said, like, we're just going to grind on this for 2 weeks, get this as good as we can, and we're going to go out and take it to some potential design partners and see, you know, if we put like a price tag behind it, like will anyone move on it? And that was basically the signal that we used to be like, yes, we're going to quit our jobs, we're going to go full time on this, and we're going to try to make this happen. And that was the initial demo. And we were talking to some investors at the same time, and they started to show some interest. So we raised a quick seed round, and then one of those early design partners kind of came out of nowhere and said, "Hey, like, when's that thing going to be ready to use? We
Oh,
want to use
nice.
that and we'll pay for it. And can you do our email as well? And we're a Python shop, so we're going to need a Python SDK. And so Chris, who's really like the technical half of Knock, just went beast mode for a couple weeks and got all of that ready. Like the night before, we were both up late, like putting the finishing touches on this thing, and we demoed it to them the next day, and they were our first paid customers. So
That's awesome.
that's kind of how that started. Yeah.
That's awesome. I feel like it's crazy because it's like you guys have so many customers now, but I can relate to the fact that that first customer, like it's literally 0 to 1, like it's a
Yeah.
different feeling. Um, but
It
that's
really
awesome.
is. Yeah, and I think like those earliest days of an idea feel. I remember we were sitting around my kitchen table in Brooklyn, and Chris was like one of the first people I saw like in person because it was still like COVID. We were talking about the product and what it could be, and it felt like we were almost like kind of you know, talking about like a toy or something, right? It just felt like so delicate and yeah. And then like suddenly there's that just one person who's willing to pay any amount for it, and that was a huge moment for sure. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, okay, so the V1 of it, Sam, is like basically I hit your API and then I get after I do that, I get a feed of my customers get a feed of their notifications as well as notifications themselves in app, right? But then I imagine and the way that I would do that as a technical person is like let's say I'm using the Slack API and then I'm using an email API and I want to use Knock. I basically every time I send a Slack or email call, I would also hit Knock. Yeah? That
Yep.
was the V1 of it. Okay.
Yep.
And then at some point, and this makes a lot of sense to me, you're like, let's just get rid of Slack and email. Like, why should you even have to do that? Just only hit Knock. And that's a reason for someone to kind of stick with Knock long term, and you can build a lot more on top of that and stuff like that. Am I correct in saying that that's kind of the current version of Knock? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You can think of it as like if you're sending, we call it a trigger request, right? So like the kind of essential unit of Knock is a workflow, and that workflow is triggered by an API request from your service, and we are then orchestrating, uh, you know, sending templates to any of those channels, and we also become your kind of CMS for all notification templates, right?
Yeah.
And the first product version of the product that someone was paying for was a single workflow trigger request to Knock that is orchestrating both in-app and email messages. So right off the bat, we were at least
Understood.
covering like two very common
Yep.
channels.
Yep.
And if you think about it, the templates for those channels probably look pretty different. Um, but you're using the same data to like personalize those messages, and so there is this sort of like if you start using Knock just for in-app, um, then pretty quickly like teams will tend to be like, well, let's just use them for email too, and we can delete a bunch of code and think of uh, this single kind of request as the thing that's triggering all of our cross-channel messaging, and then they'll bring in preferences so they can manage that in our model as well.
Got it.
So that's kind of the current version of the product is a single API request that we are then fanning out to any of the channels that you want to use to send product notifications to customers. And then, as you want to use more parts of our API or you want to store, preferences for a given user, we'll start evaluating those preferences during runtime for you. And we have some more advanced, APIs for powering things like multi-tenancy within B2B apps and making sure your in-app feeds are scoped per tenant. And we have an
Oh.
objects API for kind of pub sub models and things like that.
Okay, okay. Very cool. Very cool. I guess that answers a lot of my questions on the like future stuff. But maybe before we get there also, I'm curious like Sam on the so what is the challenge with standardizing each of these channels? Like I can only imagine it's hard to say in y'all's language or own version of how you would represent this, that an email can be sent in the same way a Slack notification can be sent, specifically because I imagine the way that things are formatted in Slack versus email in their respective APIs are very different. So how have y'all thought about that? And what are the limitations of that too?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say, again, like the data that you're often using across those channels will look pretty similar, right? You usually want to understand like what's the person's name that is receiving this notification so you can personalize it.
Okay.
Let's take a use case like commenting, right, which is a very common one that customers will come to Knock to power. You usually want to have some context around, what's the body of the comment message itself, on what resource in your application was the comment left, whether that's a page or a video or whatever it might be, right? If it's a reply, who are the followers that are following that reply and should be notified about this message? So, there are those kind of essential like parameters that you can think of that are coming into a workflow that are telling us who needs to be notified and what is the data to inject into the Slack template and the email template to then notify that user.
Okay.
I think like we've seen some of our competitors have done work around trying to provide like an abstract like syntax so that you only have to define a template once and then they will kind of compile it down into a Slack notification and an email. We looked at that, but what we were seeing from customers was like your email, you're often going to want to have like be pretty specific to that channel and you're probably writing that template specific for email.
And if it's like a different team, like that's managing the email versus the Slack, it kind of doesn't matter at that point too, right?
Yeah, sure. And like for Slack, right, we have some customers that will just do like simple like markdown messaging for Slack, and that's certainly cool. And a lot of our customers will want to use BlockKit, which is Slack's kind of JSON syntax for building more advanced messages. And so I think like for more advanced use cases, you kind of get into this place where you're going to want to manage a template for each of those channels.
Sure.
So then the question becomes like, what are the abstractions we can provide that make it easy to like share context across those as you need to?
And so for Slack, the BlockKit example, I'm familiar with that. How does it work? If I want to use BlockKit, but I also want to use Knock, am I sending you API requests that have BlockKit in them? Or
no.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you are building a template in Knock that is just JSON and represents like the BlockKit message that you want to generate in Slack.
And then when I send you an API request, I reference the ID of that template that I created in the Knock UI or something.
Yeah, you're triggering the workflow. Let's say it's comment created is the workflow. And within that, you have a Slack step. It has a template. That template is the kind of JSON block syntax for sending that Slack message.
Yep.
And we do some cool things like Liquid is our templating language within Knock. So you use Liquid to insert data from your payload into a message. But we've also done a lot of work to make sure that our JSON editor supports Liquid as well. So if you think about that comment use case, we'll often see customers that want to produce or render a table in their Slack messages that is iterating through, however many comments are in a batch. And we can talk about our batching engine in a little bit. But we basically make it easy to say, like, for every comment in this batch, iterate through it and render this block, right? Render this block that includes the title of the comment, its body, the resource on which it was left, with like a Slack action, right? That type of thing.
Understood. And that type of thing is a different part of the notification side, right? Like that's more like rendering notifications for in-app and things like that. Yeah.
What do you mean by kind of
The
like
batching
the template?
logic.
Oh,
Like,
sure. Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah. So like, think of like you have a workflow, right, that you're building. It starts with a trigger, and in the simplest cases, you will just have a step for email, a step for Slack, a step for in-app, and each of those steps is a template that we are then sending to the user that you've run through that workflow.
Got it.
We also have a number of different functions for kind of managing the state within that workflow, pausing the workflow in cases where you need to do that. And one of our more powerful and popular functions, and one of the first ones we built, is our batch function. And our batch function basically says, for like commenting is a great use case. Without a batch function, if I'm in a video and highlight, right, and I'm leaving a bunch of comments across a number of different timestamps, we saw the same thing at Frame.io. You're in a video, you're leaving many comments within 5 or 10 minute review session of that video. You get a big stream of comments that will come through, and you just end up getting a bunch of emails as that user, or a bunch of in-app notifications
I
for
see.
each of those comments, which is a very annoying experience. So batching basically says take that stream of comments, and we built this same engine in-house at Frame, and if there are 23 comments left within a 30-minute review session, just batch it into a single email, but make sure you include the context to tell the user, hey, there are 23 comments left on this video by these 3 users, and here's a preview of 2 of the comments that were left, and you can go view the video at this URL. Right?
Very cool. Very cool. Understood. That's really cool. Okay. Well, I guess, Sam, the other question I was going to ask is, so like in the early days, right, like the first year of Knock, what were some surprising things that were like unlocks that like a customer maybe really liked that you didn't think were that way? You know what I mean? Like, I guess that maybe influenced the product direction more so than you would have thought. Yeah. Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are 2 that come to mind. I think the first thing is, and this was maybe like less of a surprise from a customer and more just something that like we learned as we used Knock ourselves to power Knox notifications, which gets kind of meta if you think about it too much. But we of course use our own product, and at first we just had API requests coming into our workflow engine processing those, running these notifications for customers. But pretty quickly you realize like, if I'm not formatting that request in the right way, or if a user hasn't been identified in the system before I make the request, or my Slack channel data hasn't been configured in the right way. There are all these kind of points from the initial request to the requests that we make kind of downstream of Knock in to a service like SendGrid, that you really want to have like full visibility into the tool and exactly what we're doing at each step in the process. So we pretty early on like saw that and said like, let's really go deep on this and figure out how we can make this feel like a best-in-class kind of debugging experience for when you're first setting up Knock. And then 2, like make sure that you have like perfect observability into the system once you're using us in production. So
yeah, it's like observability for notifications. That's a world I know very well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what we found from customers is like at first our line there was like, we don't want you to have to make a compromise on observability when you decide to use a third-party vendor to power what is maybe not like your core product, but is a critical part of your product experience. But what we saw as we went to a lot of customers is for many of them, they were getting a better observability experience in Knock than they had maybe been able to like
Yeah,
allocate resources for internally, right?
because I
And spend
imagine
time
you
on
have
internally.
yeah, I imagine you have like engineers logging like user identified here and then like logging sent to SendGrid here and it's all like not in the same format. So it's almost better that you're like the single source of truth that for that sort of thing. And I
It,
imagine it comes up in sales conversations a lot where people are like, "Oh, but it's a black box." And then you're like, "Actually, it's not." Right?
yeah.
That's
Oh,
pretty
and
cool.
it create. You're right in that, like, if you're building this in house, like you're certainly logging some of this stuff somewhere, right? But the thing that we did learn from customers on this is, once we shipped all these tools for, finding like which messages have failed to deliver, and like what are the requests we're making to the downstream service from Knock, and like what are the responses we're getting back from their service, and why is this happening? At first, it was our customers' engineers that were looking through that, but then we started to get requests for like, hey, can we add our support team to Knock, and can they just dig through this? And we realized that we were kind of solving that problem too. Or at Frame, it was pretty frequently we would get a message from some enterprise customer whose their invite emails aren't being sent to users, aren't getting through to users for some reason, and is it something with their firewall? Is it something else? And it was always a ticket for an engineer to kind of dig through the logs and see if we can find out kind of what's happening.
Yeah, and then it's like
And
it can get lost easily. It's like among all the other priorities you have. It's like if the engineer happens to have time to look into this thing.
yeah, or like if it's a big enough customer, you have to like put the
Yeah.
project that they're working on pause. And so that was kind of a cool learning there is that what we were building, even though like it's very much a developer tool and like engineers are most often the people like in Knock every day, we've now seen like at our larger customers, a big part of who uses Knock is support teams and ops teams that are responsible for kind of working with customers around like the messaging that the product delivers to them.
Understood.
The second cool thing we saw, go ahead.
No. You go ahead. You go ahead.
The second cool thing we saw was, we built this in-app feed API, right? And I talked about earlier how like that was really built for like the initial use case and channel that we solved for with Knock, which was like enabling you to ship an in-app feed really, really quickly. But in building that, what that feed API really is a kind of per user stateful, meaning like we're not just ephemerally passing these messages through to you, like they're always available, and we're keeping state around, for each message has a given user seen it, have they marked it as read, have they archived it.
Oh, I see.
And so really what it is just kind of a reverse cron feed of messages that a particular user is receiving from your service, and we're also managing the socket connection, so you get those messages in real time. So we started to see customers adapt that API to a bunch of different use cases. So some were using it to power kind of toast drawers within their product. Others started powering full page inbox experiences with it, and then more recently some of our customers have started to use it to power like in-app lifecycle messages. So if you're an enterprise admin and you've gotten to like a certain threshold of usage, they'll use our in-app infrastructure to kind of point you to like their localization features that you might not be aware of, and things like that.
It's
But
almost like it's like onboarding almost. It's like
yeah,
it's almost like I have a customer or I have a user. Can I timestamp their actions over time? Obviously, we want to notify them of those actions, but it's like because it's stateful, it almost defines the user lifecycle as well. It's really cool.
yeah, and like we recently, there's an update that we were making to one of our like in-app template editors where we've added some functionality where it makes it really easy to power like inline actions within the feed messages that you author within Knock, but you have to be on a certain version of our component library to take advantage of that. And it's the kind of message that you want a user to see, but you don't want them to see it like after they've seen it once or they've acknowledged that they've seen it once.
Yeah.
And you could maybe store that in local storage, but like a cool thing about our offering is like we just keep that state. We make it super easy to understand, like, has it been marked as read, has it been archived? And so there's some more stuff that we have coming soon around powering those types of experiences and making that even easier to get started with Knock on. But yeah, that's another kind of cool place where we saw like our customers in the market really pull like product out of us that we really didn't know was there until they told us it was.
Makes sense. That's awesome. So you talked about like support and ops people using your product. Does that inspire you or influence you in terms of what the future of your product looks like? Like perhaps going more into and I think we've talked about this like earlier, but like going more into the sort of like marketing automation or even like those other types of spaces that are kind of like like they're on the sidelines but not like full notifications focused. And then how do you think about prioritizing focus over like going wider?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And like focus and going wider, it's kind of like the like product roadmap question that I think a lot of founders face, a lot of product managers face that. So I don't think there's ever any like single best answer, though. Like I tend to lean more towards focus and like do one thing and do it really, really well and be the best at that, and just focus on that before you like broaden the aperture at all. And a really hard thing about the early stages of a company is it's not just the product, it's the distribution that like feeds into it, and it's hard to know when you're in those early days, like, is this a product problem? Is the product there, but like we're just not working hard enough on distribution to get it to people, have enough people just not heard about us.
Yep.
And I think like the way this is kind of retrospectively looking at this, but I think the way we thought about that at Knock was like, we're using this product ourselves. We feel that we have good taste in what this product should be. Like, does it feel like it's at a place yet where we're really proud to distribute it and tell people about it? We probably leaned into that for a little bit too long and should have announced like the V1 of our product earlier than we did. But like, we used some of our just intuition on like, is the product there? And then once we really felt that it was, like, let's really lean into distribution, because I think it's easy when you're focusing on one idea to get tempted by, maybe we're not seeing the growth that we should see there, and let's like broaden and start doing a bunch of things. But the internet is a gigantic place, and markets are often bigger than we think they are, and so I think it pays to like really focus early. And now that we've like started exploring, like, hey, customers are hacking the product so that they can power certain messages for marketers, and marketers are now in the product. Let's like listen to some of that feedback, and let's see if we feel that we have good leverage on what we've already built to deliver more value to our customers. And I think that, at least so far, has been our framework for expansion, is less of the kind of like MBA strategy playbook of like, where can we identify like a market that we just want to go after just because it looks like a good market, and more like, let's let customers kind of pull us into these adjacent ponds based on the like benefits they see in using us for that thing as well, if that makes sense. So we tried to just be really radically like low ego on our part and just listen to customers and kind of help let them point us in the right direction. And we'll see to what extent that works in the coming years, but so far we've gotten good feedback from customers by taking that approach.
That's awesome. I feel like that's the best version of it too. Whether it's like customers are pulling you in specific directions after they've already used the product, that's a much better expansion play than any MBA, whatever the hell, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
nice, nice. That makes sense. Okay, the last question I'll ask Sam, maybe before we'll jump off, is about dog fooding. So you mentioned dog fooding a lot, and we also dog food our own product. But I'm curious, you as a leader at Knock, how do you think about building processes and almost like requiring the fact that your team is using your product? Because I personally, I feel like I don't. It's not like a regular cadence kind of thing, but like I've tried my best to make it such that we are forced to use our own product in any place that we would otherwise use something else or something like that, right? So how do you think about that? And I imagine it's a little different for notifications, but yeah. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a good question because like you think of dog fooding a product like Knock, and it's not like every week at Knock we're rebuilding
Yeah.
our notifications from scratch, right?
Sure.
So therein lies the conundrum here. It's like how could a new hire really dog food the product
Yep.
when we're not at a place where we like for a lot of our customers they implement Knock and like they're in a place where they're just good, and when they need to introduce a new notification it takes a few minutes and their feedback is like, yeah, we don't have to think about notifications or scaling it or its reliability at all anymore, and that's great, and Knock is working really well for us. And so the way that we kind of got around that question of dog fooding is one of the first things that you do as a new employee at Knock is you go through our onboarding app project where we have like an example app. It's like a lightweight kind of collaboration, like almost like a Notion clone, and your job is to build notifications into it across in-app, email, batch. You can go for another channel if you kind of want to go for extra credit, right? And then we've taken many pages out of Stripe's playbook, but one of them is the friction log. So every new hire goes through implementing Knock just as a customer would, and spends, like we want them to have this like clear head, like this is one of your main tasks for your first week.
Yep.
And write a like very detailed, thorough friction log as you go. So the benefit there is like, one, they're using the product just as a customer would. Two, they're like thinking about it in a critical way as they write that friction log. And then three, we get on like a regular cadence as new people come into the company, a like fresh set of eyes on like all the things that could be better about the product, that's the other thing with dog fooding, I think, especially for developer tools. It's like, it can be hard to set up those like processes, and we try to be like as non-process as we can at Knock in these early stages, but
Yeah.
like process might be the wrong word, but just like loops or just kind of things that exist where like they're going to keep you honest and they're going to keep you like looking at the product with fresh eyes as often as you possibly can, right? So that's been our little hack there that's worked really well and like helps people ramp quickly at
That's
the
awesome.
same time.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, we've done a bunch of things on this note. Like I feel like every quarter-ish we do like every not new hires, right? But everyone essentially does what you just did, but with Highlight instrumentation. But I like that. I like that idea because I feel like you get a fresh eye. Like I feel like if you're an engineer for 3 months at Knock, I would think that you would be biased because you're like, I built that. Obviously, it's the best way that anyone could instrument something, right? But if you're getting new people to do it, it's like you're forcing almost a possible customer to use your product and try it out and sort of dog food it. So
Totally. Humans are adaptive creatures, right? Like we are
Yeah.
good at, like once we have to deal with the initial friction of something, it can be easy for us to learn to cope with it or like find our ways around it. Like
Yep.
life finds a way, as Dr. Malcolm would say in Jurassic Park. But
Yep.
so it's just natural that that will happen as you live with the product every day as you're building and designing it. And so yeah, it's really hard to wipe that slate clean and take like a good honest look at it constantly. And so yeah, we're always looking for new ways to do that, but that's one of the ways that's worked for us so far.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, that was my last question. Sam, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you? I know you're on Twitter and all that
Sure
fun
am.
stuff. Yeah, give us a handle, and then I can also post everything in the show notes as well.
Cool. Yeah. Well, of course, most importantly, we're at knock.app. So
Okay.
if you're ever thinking about notifications, come find us at knock.app. And then I'm on Twitter at Sam Seeley. I'm on LinkedIn. Sam Seeley there as well, probably plus like a bunch of like random numbers on the end of my LinkedIn slug. But those are the two places where I'm the most active.
Sounds good. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks, man. It was fun to have you, and good luck with everything at Knock, and hopefully soon we will be users. I think all the stuff that y'all are working on is really cool, and would love to try it out soon.
Yeah, same to you. We're happy Highlight customers. It's a great product, and thanks for having me on. It was fun to just kind of chat and jam on this stuff.
Of course.
All right.
Cool.
See you, Jay.